Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 289. Happy Monday. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Going to pick up where I left off in the last podcast. I have a lot to share with you guys. We're mostly going to talk about what's going on with the negotiations in trying to negotiate a peace deal and bring the war in Ukraine to an end. Today is the 3-year anniversary. We have been talking about the $36.5 trillion in debt, and said that I was going to tell the story and explain how we got into $36.5 trillion in debt. And I want to get back into the Clinton administration. We started telling this story starting with the George H.W. Bush administration. We talked about the Gulf War, the beginning of the decade of the 90s. I want to get through the beginning of the decade or the decade of the 90s. And at the end of the decade of the 90s, we're going to have budget surpluses. The budget's going to be balanced. It's the last time that the budget was balanced. It was in year 2000, and we had a budget surplus that year. And the next year, we start the war in the global war on terrorism in Afghanistan. It's going to be a few years later, but they start to build up to the second war in Iraq under Bush Jr. And we're going to get back into that probably in the next podcast. I want to get back into what I was talking about in the last podcast, and we're going to talk more about what's going on with Ukraine and these warmongers. I can't stand, I'm going to use the word hate. I hate warmongers. I hate war. And people, ask the question, is it okay as a believer, as a follower of Jesus Christ, to hate? And it depends on what you hate. If you hate the things that God hates, if you hate the things that are an abomination to God, like what we covered in the last podcast, this passage here in Proverbs 6, verse 6, starting at verse 16, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are abomination to him. A proud look. If you hate a proud look, I would say as a believer, it's okay to hate a proud look because you hate what God hates. If you hate a lying tongue, then I would say that it's okay to hate people with a lying tongue, or hate a lying tongue because that's what God hates. If you hate hands that shed innocent blood, I would think that it's okay for a believer, for a Christian, to hate what God hates. God hates the shedding of innocent blood. If you hate a heart that devises wicked plans, a heart that conspires to do wickedness, if you hate that, I would say that it's okay as a believer to hate what God hates because God hates that. If you hate feet that are swift running towards evil or running to evil, if you hate that, people that are quick to run to evil, if you hate that, then I would think that that's okay to hate what God hates. If you hate a false witness that speaks lies, if you hate one that sows discord, like we were talking about in the last podcast, the people that are always sowing discord, God hates that. Jesus says in the Beatitudes that blessed are the peacemakers. So, for they shall be called the children of God. Think about that in contrast of what this proverb says God hates. He hates those who sow discord. And then Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the children of God. The peacemaker is what God loves. And just like it is appropriate to hate what God hates, I think that it's appropriate to love what God loves. God loves the peacemaker. God loves truth. God loves justice. God loves righteousness. So I'm going to love what God loves and hate what God hates. And I hate war. I hate the warmongers. I hate the people that conspire to bring to do wicked plans and bring about war and to sow discord and the lying tongues and the false witness that tells lies. I can't stand those people. I hate them. And I hate war. I hate war so much. I not only hate war because of what it costs in treasure, and it costs a lot in treasure. Cost a lot in treasure, but I also hate the blood that is shed, the innocent blood that is shed. I hate it. And I also, I hate what it does to the lives that they don't shed their blood. They don't, they go out and they fight the wars. We create monsters and then we try to integrate them back into society after going to Iraq, after going to Afghanistan and, or Vietnam or wherever and doing atrocious things, which are part of what war is. And then coming home and trying to integrate back into society. You wonder why there's PTSD. You wonder why there is so much suicide among the veterans of these forever wars, the wars over the last 20 years, because there's no justice in these wars. These are unjust wars. And it's hard to get people to go to a foreign theater and participate in atrocities and to kill people and them to know that there's no justice in that war. And then to come back and try to integrate into society. Yes, you're going to have problems with PTSD and mental illness. And that's why the suicide rate is so high. I hate what war does to people. Propaganda. Propaganda is one of the most effective tools in war. One of the most effective weapons of war. Let's say that. Say it that way. Propaganda is one of the most effective weapons of war because propaganda, it creates the story that makes you believe that it's a just war. And the propaganda is what gives not only the soldier the inspiration to go out and fight the war, to join up, to go out and fight the war because we're fighting for this reason, whatever this ideology is. If it's to, we're fighting for freedom. We're fighting to defeat communism. We're fighting for whatever the reason is. The propaganda gives not only the reason for the soldier to go fight, but for the people back home to support and to sacrifice their sons, their husbands. That you're willing to make that sacrifice because of the propaganda that is associated with the war. And as soon as the propaganda shifts and you start losing support at home, then you're going to start seeing a winding down of the war. And that's what happened in Vietnam. All the protesting over the draft, all the protesting over the death into Vietnam. That's what brought Vietnam to an end so fast, is because the messaging back home, they were losing the messaging war, the propaganda war. Same thing with the war on terrorism in Afghanistan. They would have kept the Afghanistan war going for another 20 years if the American people would have allowed it. But the American people said no, because the propaganda that supported the war in Afghanistan, that it was starting to fail. And that's what's going on with this war in Ukraine. The amount of people that supported the war in Ukraine back in 2022, when Russia first rolled their tanks over the Ukrainian border, the number of Americans that supported that war back then has gone down significantly. Fewer Americans support that war, not more. Why? Because the propaganda is failing. The ideology and the reasoning behind that war, now people are understanding the truth about how the war started. And as the war carries on, fewer and fewer people buy into the propaganda. But propaganda is the most important and most effective weapon in war. Without effective propaganda, the war is not going to last very long. And that's the objective of these people. They want to keep the war going because the war machine keeps the money flowing, and the money flowing into defense industry is what it's all about. War is a racket, like Smedley Butler said. They had a vote in the UN today on a resolution. It's the anniversary, third anniversary of the full scale. And you'll notice they use that word full scale, the full scale invasion of Russia. What do they mean by full scale? This again is propaganda. Why are they using that term full scale to describe the war in Ukraine? Because what they're saying is that Russia invaded back in 2014 when they took over Crimea, but it wasn't a full scale invasion. That Russia didn't do the full scale invasion until 2022. The invasion of Crimea, which wasn't an invasion at all. It's ridiculous to say that Russia invaded Crimea. There was no invasion of Crimea, but that's part of the propaganda, that the invasion of Crimea in 2014 was the first minor incursion into Ukraine, and then the full-scale incursion into Ukraine happened in 2022. But this is the third anniversary of the full-scale invasion, so they presented this resolution to condemn Russia in the UN, and this resolution talked about going back to the borders from 2014, which that's never going to happen. I mean, the borders 2014, they're talking about Russia giving up Crimea, giving up Donetsk and Lugansk and Mariupol and all of that area that they have. That's never going to happen. Russia's not giving that up. And to say that Russia's going to give that up, then you just want the war to continue. So this resolution had that in the resolution. The United States voted against the resolution in the UN, and everyone is surprised about it. I don't know why they're surprised about it, but take a listen to this clip.
There was a resolution that passed at the United Nations marking the 3 years of the war. And the U.S. did not vote yes. The U.S. voted no. And among the other countries that voted no were North Korea, Russia, Hungary, and Belarus, and the list goes on. And the list goes on. Resolution said was that Russia invaded Ukraine, and also did have language in there that suggested that Russia should leave Ukraine and it should go back to the borders before Russia invaded. This is really amazing.
This is really amazing.
Is now on record in the United Nations on the side of North Korea and Russia when it comes to language. No, it's just a resolution marking it. It doesn't really do anything. It was the American resolution. This was a U.S. drafted resolution.
No, it wasn't Potato Head.
Identify Russia as the aggressor. That was a separate one that they tried, which didn't pass. You're right. There was a separate resolution. But as the language is upgraded, the U.S. says we're not going to agree to this. That's exactly right. We're not going to call Russia the aggressor. Which is why they voted no. At the UN.
Yeah. But I think
at the UN.
In conjunction with Vance's remarks at the Munich Security Conference, which is, of course, a very important sort of international event, where he really focused on sort of these cultural issues and laid into Europe quite strongly. What it seems like we're seeing is a repositioning of the United States away from the nation's traditional allies in Europe and towards Russia. And it's just, it's remarkable.
Well, yeah.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable that it seems like the United States is moving away from the European allies and moving towards Russia. No, the United States is moving towards peace. Donald Trump was elected to bring peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. God hates a lying tongue. God hates the shedding of innocent blood. God hates those who sow discord and to try to keep the war going. And yes, the United States is moving in a very different direction. Do you guys remember the phone call that then Undersecretary for Barack Obama at his State Department under Hillary Clinton, or this was probably under Kerry. Yeah, this was under Kerry because it was 2014. but the undersecretary at the State Department under Barack Obama, Victoria Nuland, this phone call, this leaked phone call that we don't know who tapped her phone and the phone of the then ambassador to Ukraine, their conversation. It was likely Russia that tapped their phones and then released this phone call. But the phone call was explosive. And it talks about in the beginning of the phone call, Victoria Nuland is guiding after the coup d'etat or as the coup d'etat is going on and Yanukovych has to flee. The democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, has to flee because all this violence is going on there at Maidan. And this is a conversation that Victoria Nuland is having as all this is going on. And she's talking about who's going to go in the interim government, who she thinks should go in, who she thinks shouldn't go in, and guiding all of this. I mean, this is a coup d'etat that's being run by the Obama administration. And she's on this phone, and I want you to pay close attention because the major talking point that came out of this is Victoria Nuland saying, F the EU. And she says, F the EU, but you got to understand why she says F the EU. And we're going back to this controversial vote in the United Nations because everyone's so surprised and clutching their pearls that Donald Trump, his administration, voted against this resolution that is going to exacerbate the war. It's not going to help bring the war to a close sooner. It's just only going to exacerbate the war. Donald Trump understands this, and that's why he voted against this resolution. But listen to what Victoria Nuland says about the United Nations that leads her to say F the EU in this phone call with Jeffrey Pratt.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Robert Seri. He's got a new name for the UN guy, is what she says at the end of this conversation.
I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
F the EU, that it would be great to have this guy Seri and the Secretary General from the UN, same UN that issued this resolution today, that the United States voted against, and everybody's clutching their pearls, that we can get Robert Seri, and he will come in and help glue this thing. Glue what thing? What's the thing that she's talking about that the UN is going to come in and help glue? The coup d'etat, the change of government in Ukraine, that we have people in the UN that are working with us, Victoria Nuland says, to help glue this thing. To glue the coup d'etat and the change of government is what she's talking about here. Listen again.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So we gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon. So this is Robert Seri. Robert Seri is a Dutch diplomat. Robert H. Seri is a Dutch diplomat that serves as the United Nations Special Coordinator to the Middle East. If you come down here, talks about right here. In early March of 2014, Seri, same Seri that Victoria Nuland was just talking about, he was sent to Crimea, Ukraine to mediate a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where he was held by armed guards and forced to abandon his mission. Mr. Seri appointed to the mediator role had been foreshadowed in a telephone conversation in February between Victoria Nuland and then Undersecretary of State of European Affairs, Jeffrey Pratt. So this is the phone call that they're talking about here that is foreshadowing Seri. She says that we can get Seri and
that would be great.
We can get Seri and Ban Ki-moon to come in and help glue this thing. What thing? The change of government in Ukraine, the coup d'etat. And we're going to bring them into Ukraine to represent the UN to help us glue this thing.
And guy, Robert Seri, did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
So the UN was helping glue the thing. The UN was on the side of Victoria Nuland and the Obama administration. The UN was not being impartial. The UN was not looking at this and what was going on as an impartial broker for all members of the United Nations. No, they were doing the work of the Obama administration. The UN was on the side of Victoria Nuland. They were bringing Seri in and Ban Ki-moon to do the will to help glue this thing and the change of government and the coup d'etat. And that's why when he goes to Crimea, they do hold him at gunpoint and tell him to get out of here. They don't arrest him or anything like that, but they tell him to get out of here. Like I said, Russia likely recorded the conversation between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pratt. They're the ones who leaked it. So they know who this guy is from the UN that's coming in and what his purpose is for coming in. They knew that. So that's why they held him at gunpoint and told him to get out of here. We know that you're doing the work of the Americans. We heard the phone call where Victoria Nuland said that you're working for them.
A UN special representative has been forced to leave Ukraine's Crimea region after being hijacked at gunpoint. Robert Seri was in Crimea on a fact-finding mission. His car was blocked by unknown armed men in uniform as he left the headquarters of the Navy in Simferopol. The men said they had orders to take him to the airport. He refused and walked into a nearby coffee shop for help, where he called Ukraine's deputy foreign minister and described what was happening. Seri was then blockaded in the coffee shop. Eventually, he was escorted by police through the crowds, having agreed to leave the country and go to the airport.
So they forced him out. They forced him to leave because they had the phone call. They knew that he was working with the Americans and that they were working along with the Americans for the coup d'etat to oust Yanukovych and bring in a new government. And this is Ban Ki-moon, who she also mentions in that phone call. When she says F the EU, why does she say F the EU? We have the UN on our side. Because the EU, France, Germany, while all this is going on with Euromaidan, they're there negotiating and trying to negotiate peace. They had actually worked out a deal with Yanukovych that he was going to have early elections. The elections were not supposed to take place until the following year in 2015, but to negotiate a peaceful settlement in Ukraine, Yanukovych had agreed with France, with Germany, with other European leaders to have early elections. They were trying to negotiate a peaceful a solution to it. And that's why Victoria Nuland says, no, we don't need a peaceful solution. We got Ban Ki-moon, we got Robert Seri, and they've agreed to come in and help glue this thing, the United Nations. So the United Nations is not to be trusted, at all. And you don't think Trump knows this? This is why Trump voted against this resolution, because Trump is trying to bring peace. Trump is trying to come to a peaceful solution. And the things that Trump are doing right now in his negotiations with Russia and trying to end this war should not surprise anyone. Should not surprise anyone at all. There's this movie, and it's called The Sum of All Fears. I believe, let's see when it came out. Came out in 2002, The Sum of All Fears. And this is a movie with Morgan Freeman and Ben Affleck. Morgan Freeman is the DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence. Ben Affleck is an analyst. And the plot of the movie, The Sum of All Fears, if you haven't seen it, let's just read the Wikipedia page here. The Sum of All Fears is a 2002 American spy thriller directed by Phil Robinson, based on a Tom Clancy 1991 novel. So it says that the film, in which was set on Jack Ryan's film series, is a reboot taking place in 2002. Jack Ryan is portrayed as a younger character, Ben Affleck. Here's the plot. An Australian neo-Nazi plans to trigger nuclear war between the United States and Russia. So these outside forces are trying to sow discord and trying to create a war between Russia and the United States and create an atmosphere where these two long-term enemies would eventually engage with each other into war. So and this is it's so close to what's going on in Ukraine there, because the question is, who started the war in Ukraine? Was it Ukraine or was it Russia? And I was telling you in the last podcast, it was the people who sowed the seeds for discord, the people who set the stage for the war that started the war. It's like being in high school and having two enemies in high school that hate each other, and you have an individual that goes and whispers in one of their ears that, hey, this guy is talking mess about you, and it may be true, it may be a lie, whatever, but he's encouraging this guy to get into a conflict with the other guy. And then that same conspirator goes to, or that same agitator goes to the other guy and whispers things in his ear and says, hey, this guy's, talking to you. So he encourages both of them and whispers the rumors and the lies in their ears to get them to engage with one another. I mean, you look at who throws the first punch in the fight and say, well, the guy over here who threw the first punch, he's the one who started the war because he threw the first punch. But no, he didn't start the war. The person who sowed the seeds, the person who whispered the rumors, the person who spread the lies, that's the person who started the war. So that's the plot of this movie, that an Australian neo-Nazi plans to trigger a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. So in the plot of the movie, they're setting the stage. They're doing things behind the scenes to create a hot war between the United States and Russia. Australian neo-Nazi plans to trigger a nuclear war between the United States and Russia so that he can establish a fascist superstate in Europe. After the neo-Nazi scientists build the secret nuclear bomb to detonate in Baltimore, a rogue Russian officer paid off by the Nazi attacks a U.S. aircraft carrier. So you have conspirators on both sides trying to prompt this war and to get this war started. So that's what the plot of the movie is. And this is the last scene of the movie, The Sum of All Fears, where like I was telling you in the last podcast, how John Kennedy wanted to create peace with Russia back in the 1960s after the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had created the satellite phone, the red phone, where he had open communications with Khrushchev, and he was trying to create a peaceful settlement to the Cold War back in 1962. And then he's killed in November. It doesn't come to fruition, but in this fictional movie, it does come to fruition. The president of the United States and the Russian president, instead of engaging in war, when they come close to war, just like the Cuban Missile Crisis, but instead of engaging, they realize that someone is trying to set them up and get them to fight. And instead of fighting, they sign a peace treaty. The president of the United States, you see the United States flag here, the Russian flag here. They come and they sign a peace treaty. This is the last scene of the movie. And then you hear the song from Pavarotti. I forget the name of the song, but the opera singer Pavarotti, this is his song that you hear at the end of the movie when Russia and the United States come together to sign this treaty. And the conspirators, those who are trying to sow the discord, those that were trying to get them to engage into a fight, then you see those people being killed in this last scene. Nusan Dorma is the name of the song. This is one of the conspirators. This is another one of the conspirators. So the movie ends with, the suspense and of the second act is that the United States and the Russians are, like seconds from nuclear holocaust, from starting nuclear war, and it's prevented. And they realize that these sowers of discord, these agitators that were trying to prompt Russia and the United States into a conflict, that they were conspiring and to do this, and they're killed at the end, and the United States and Russia come together and sign this treaty. I tell you that because all of that relate to that movie is because this song, if you think that this is just a coincidence that Donald Trump, and he used this song a lot during the campaign, but this was the very last song that they play when the balls and the balloons are dropping there at the convention, the RNC convention, over the summer. And it's the song. He has a guy come in that sings this opera song, this Pavarotti song, and it's the exact same song from the last scene in the movie, Sum of All Fears. You see Trump with the bandage on his ear when they tried to kill him. So it's ridiculous to think that it's a coincidence that Donald Trump would play this song at the end of the RNC. And again, he used this exact song several times during the campaign, and it relates back to this movie, The Sum of All Fears. And what I'm trying to tell you is that Donald Trump knows what's going on. He's not stupid, and he's not buying the propaganda about the war in Ukraine. He knows how this war started. He knows that there were peace agreements that were violated by the Ukrainians, and he knows that the people from the United States, like Lindsey Graham, like John McCain, like what's his name, the senator from Connecticut that went over there from during Euromaidan and urged them to fight, urged them to keep the fight going. That Donald Trump knows all this. I played the clip from RFK, who is his HHS director, who is a member of his cabinet, and what he was saying in the last podcast about this war. You don't think that RFK and Donald Trump have had a conversation about this? You don't think Trump knows what's going on, people? He knows that there are provocateurs trying to sow discord and trying to keep this war going. He knows that. This today in the Oval Office. France's president is here in the United States, and they had a meeting there in the Oval Office. And Donald Trump is asked about this vote where in the United Nations, in the UN, where he voted against the resolution condemning Russia and against the resolution saying that Russia and Ukraine have to go back to the 2014 borders. And he's asked about it in this press conference that he does after the meeting with Macron. Take a listen.
Can you explain the rationale, sir, in the U.S.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Can you explain the rationale in having the U.S. vote against the UN resolutions that Ukraine proposed and also the U.S. proposed?
I would rather not explain it now, but it's sort of self-evident.
It's self-evident. He says, I would rather not explain it now, but if you've been paying attention, you should know why I voted against it. It's self-evident. It's self-evident, people. Here's Macron right here, sitting across the table. I showed a little bit of this in the last podcast, but this is the Minsk II. This is the second Minsk agreements. The first one's failed, so Russia came back again and said, let's try again. Let's negotiate peace. I mean, you have to make people explain. And going back to Ukraine or Crimea in 2014, when they voted for their independence and then were annexed by Russia, and they called that the first invasion that Russia invaded Crimea. People, tell me, does this look like an invasion to you? I mean, how did they even create this propaganda and have people believing it when you can just go online and look at the truth? I mean, we live in an information age. There's no reason for people to be so ignorant in an information age when you have the facts right there at your fingertips on your phone.
Sunday to break away from Ukraine.
This is in Ukraine or in Crimea in 2014 after the referendum. They're all waving Russian flags. They're all happy. They're all celebrating. They all have smiles on their faces. How is this an invasion? Look, these people's faces, I see nothing but teeth and smiles. Look at these people. Do they look like they're being invaded? No, these people weren't invaded. They voted for their independence. And you say, well, the vote wasn't fair. They didn't have United Nations election monitors there. Of course you didn't have United Nations election monitors. Of course you didn't have United Nations election monitors because the United Nations were on the side of Victoria Nuland to help them glue this thing together. The United Nations had already picked sides. The United Nations were not impartial. The United Nations were on the sides of the people that were staging the coup, the provocateurs, the people that were sowing the seeds of discord. So, of course, the United Nations are not going to come in and monitor the election in Crimea. They're on the side of the people that are staging the coup. They're there to glue the thing together. So when people say that, well, we can't trust the election in Crimea where these people voted for their independence after the coup d'etat, and then so we're just going to call it an invasion? There was no invasion. These people voted for their independence. Look at the smiles, nothing but smile. Look at this, smiles. They're all smiling. They're all happy, celebrating. There was no invasion in Crimea. These people voted for their independence and then were annexed by Russia. But the question is,
Crimeans voted overwhelmingly on Sunday to break away from Ukraine and join Russia in a referendum the West condemned as illegal. With half the ballots counted, 95.5% of Crimea residents...
Does this look like an invasion? Them waving their hands, smiling? Their invasion? Where do you see the invasion going on? This is Crimea, 2014.
95.5% of Crimea residents voted to break away from Ukraine, according to local officials.
Every resident of Sebastopol is celebrating. You're celebrating during an invasion? You guys are celebrating during an invasion.
Ощущение праздника воссоединения с нашей истинной родиной России. В принципе, мы никогда от нее и не отходили, и себя так же.
So there was no invasion in Crimea. But the question is, because the same thing happened in Donbass, in Donetsk and Lugansk. They also had a referendum. They also voted for their independence. But when they went to Russia and asked Russia, will you please annex us the same way that you annexed Crimea? Vladimir Putin said no. He didn't annex the Donbass immediately like he had annexed Crimea. And I've told you this before. The reason that he annexed Crimea right away is because their base in Sevastopol is very strategic it's their only warm water base on the Black Sea. I mean, they've had that naval base forever. It's a very strategic base. So it was important for them to take Crimea immediately and annex them immediately. But when the Donbass, when they voted for their independence and asked Russia to annex them, Vladimir Putin said no. If Vladimir Putin wanted to gobble up Ukrainian land, and that was his mission, and he was invading so he can gobble up all of this Ukrainian land, why did he wait until 2022, 6 years later, to annex Donbass? Why didn't he annex Donbass immediately in 2014 when they voted for their independence, just like Crimea voted for their independence and requested to be annexed? Because Vladimir Putin was trying to negotiate peace. He was trying to negotiate peace. And he entered into the first Minsk agreements to try to negotiate peace. And he knew if he had annexed the Donbass the same way it had annexed Crimea, that it would be a roadblock to the peace negotiations. So that's why he didn't annex the Donbass in 2014 like he did in Crimea after both regions voted to declare their independence. But this is the second Minsk meeting, the Minsk II meeting. You see Macron here. You see Angela Merkel here. This is the president of France. This is the chancellor of Germany, and they're mediating this peace agreement. This peace agreement falls through because, again, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Amy Klobuchar, they went over there in 2016, and they told under Petro Poroshenko was the president at that time, but told him to keep up the fight. 2017 is going to be the year of offense. This is 2 years later when Zelensky comes in 2019, and they have another peace agreement, but they violate the peace agreement. They keep up the fight. And Vladimir Putin's here trying to make peace. And then they had another peace agreement in 2022, shortly before Russia committed to the full-scale invasion. In 2022, they had another peace agreement that they were about to sign in Turkey. And Boris Johnson from England comes over and tells Zelensky, don't sign this peace deal. So in every aspect, after the coup d'etat in 2014, the coup d'etat that Victoria Nuland is talking about on the phone here, that the UN is going to help them glue down. In every aspect after that coup d'etat, you find Russia trying to negotiate peace. They try to negotiate peace in Minsk I. They try to negotiate peace here in Minsk II. They try to negotiate peace before the full-scale invasion in Turkey. And in every aspect where they're trying to negotiate peace, the Ukrainians are violating the peace agreements. They're not committing to the peace agreements. They want the war to start. They want the war. They're sowing the seeds for war. They want the war. Listen to Sergei Lavrov here. This is the foreign minister for Russia. Take a listen.
As for Steve Witkoff statement that the draft of Istanbul agreements from April 2022 could serve as foundation for the Ukrainian settlement.
The Istanbul agreements for 2022. He's talking about, this is the third peace agreement that they're getting ready to sign in Turkey. And this is when Boris Johnson from England comes over and he kills the peace agreement.
2022 could serve as foundation for the Ukrainian settlement. Well, I haven't heard that. There's one thing I can confirm. Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, has said that many times, reminding that in Istanbul, 3 years ago, we were maybe 1 hour away from signing a full-scale agreement. But Boris Johnson banned Ukraine from doing that.
So Boris Johnson, he says Boris Johnson killed the agreement. We were about 1 hour away. This is 3 years ago, right before the full-scale invasion. We were in Turkey, in Istanbul, and we were getting ready to sign a full-scale agreement. This would have been the third agreement, and then Boris Johnson, he killed it. So the EU, in the beginning, like I told you, that's why Victoria Nuland says in the phone call, F the EU, we got the UN, F the EU, because in the beginning, during the coup d'etat, France, Germany, they were trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement for Yanukovych to have early elections, for there be a peaceful drawdown of the Maidan protests before the protests got violent, or the protests might have already gotten violent when they were trying to negotiate early elections. And that's why Victoria Nuland says F the EU. We got the UN to back us up, to help us glue this thing. We don't care about the EU. We got the UN. That's what she says. But then you see immediately Germany, after Yanukovych leaves and the war starts in the Donbass, and they start calling them terrorists and separatists and start bombing them in Donbass. And immediately the first Minsk agreements in Belarus start with Germany and France heading those talks and trying to negotiate. And then those talks fall through. And then we have the Minsk II agreements, negotiations, again with Germany and France trying to mediate a peaceful settlement for Donbass. This is before the full-scale invasion in 2022. And then these talks fall through. And then, again, Boris Johnson, he kills the Istanbul peace talks just before the full-scale invasion. But you see Angela Merkel here at the table for the Minsk II. Angela Merkel actually admitted what the Minsk talks were all about. Here's Angela Merkel with Zelensky. You see this article. Former German Chancellor. This came out in 2020, December of 2022. December of 2022 is a month before the full-scale invasion. The full-scale invasion started in February of 2022. So yes, this is 2 months. 2 months. Well, it's the 21st of December. So 2 months before the full-scale invasion of December, this article came out. Former German Chancellor Merkel admits the Minsk agreements were merely to buy time for Ukraine's arm to build up. The intention of these agreements, the intentions of these talks were not about to bring peace. We led Russia to believe that we wanted a peaceful agreement and that we were trying to negotiate peace. We led them to believe that. But the real intention of these peace talks were to buy time so we can build up Ukrainians' arms for war, so we can get them set up for war, because we don't want peace. The Minsk agreements were just a ploy to play on Russia, so we had time to build up their arms and their defenses in Ukraine for war, because we're preparing for war. According to former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Minsk agreements served to buy time to rearm Ukraine. Quote, the 2014 Minsk agreements was an attempt to give Ukraine time, Merkel told whatever this periodical is or outlet is. It was also used this time to become stronger, as you can see today. So the peace talks were just a ploy. They want the war. They want the war to happen, because the war is how you get the arms sales and the money. I mean, if they have peace talks, if Boris Johnson lets these peace talks go through, then 100 billion, 200 billion that we've sent Ukraine, that money doesn't go to Ukraine. If there's peace, if they negotiate, they allow there to be peace. Only way that we can get all the money flowing is if there's war. So they pretended to negotiate peace. They pretended that they were in peace talks, but it was all a ploy to allow Ukraine time to buy arms. And you have people like this. You have all of the people now in the media trying to goad Trump, calling him a Russian asset, saying that he's doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin. You're going to hear Fareed here say that Donald Trump is surrendering, and they're really trying to get under his skin. And this is a part of the propaganda. But again, going back to the sum of all fears, Trump knows this. Trump knows what's going on. He knows what the media is doing. I want you to listen to Fareed Zakaria here. I don't have very much time, but I just want you to point out what these liars in the media are doing. These people that I hate. I hate these people. I hate people that have a proud look and a lying tongue and who shed innocent blood and who whose heart devises wicked plans and whose feet are swift to run towards evil and who sows discord. I hate these people. And Fareed Zakaria, let me just show you what this guy's doing. And this is just an example because this is happening across all media outlets, even Fox News, even conservative media outlets, because again, they're the ones who want them, I mean, especially the old school, neocon Republicans. They want this. Those in Congress, those neocon Republicans in the Senate, they have lobbies from Raytheon, from all of the defense contractors. They have lobbyists assigned to them. So of course they want the war to keep going. I want you to listen to this clown, Fareed Zakaria.
It's true that Donald Trump has found a lightning-fast way to end the war in Ukraine. Surrender. At least when France fell in 1940, it did so in the wake of a German blitzkrieg that swept through the country. Ukraine has actually held back Russian forces for 3 years now, and despite fighting a much more powerful adversary, even taken some Russian land.
So even just that, at most it's a stalemate. I mean, I think that's ridiculous to try to make the case that it's a stalemate when Russia has gobbled up all of this territory. But even if you would say that Ukraine has been putting up a good fight and it's a stalemate, how long can this last? How long? We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. Do you want this to go on for 20 years, for 30 years, pushing us closer and closer to a nuclear conflict? This is ridiculous.
Actually held back Russian forces for 3 years now, and despite fighting a much more powerful adversary, even taken some Russian land. And yet, the Trump administration has preemptively conceded most key Russian demands before the formal negotiations have even begun. No return of all the Ukrainian territory acquired by force.
Never going to happen.
No NATO membership for Ukraine.
Never going to happen.
American troops on Ukrainian
Never
soil.
going to happen.
And Trump trashed Zelensky.
Listen to what this guy says. These are the demands that they want Trump to make on Russia. That he give up the territory. He's never going to give up this territory that he's already annexed. He's never going to agree for Ukraine to be part of NATO. And we're never going to put American boots on the ground in Ukraine. Are you crazy, Fareed? You go over there and fight, clown.
And yet, the Trump administration has preemptively conceded most key Russian demands before the formal negotiations have even begun. No return of all the Ukrainian territory acquired by force. No NATO membership for Ukraine.
Never going to happen.
No American troops on Ukrainian
Never
soil.
going to happen.
And Trump trashed Zelensky, calling him a dictator and saying he better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. It is no wonder that senior Russian officials like former President Dmitry Medvedev seem almost giddy with joy.
Yeah, Dmitry Medvedev, he was pretty giddy when Barack Obama on the hot mic promised Putin more flexibility after his 2012 election. He was pretty giddy then, too, Fareed.
Medvedev seem almost giddy with joy. What explains Trump's desire to sell out Ukraine and cozy up to Putin? There have been so many theories about Trump and Russia, but I think the real story here is about Trump and Zelensky. Donald Trump views almost everything from a personal lens, and his own relationship with Volodymyr Zelensky has been fraught for many years. In 2016, Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was exposed to have been on the payroll of Ukraine's former president, Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician who fled to safety in Russia in 2014 after national protests against him.
So this is Yanukovych is the president who was democratically elected, and he's not pro-Russian. Yes, he did go to Russia, but actually he was trying to negotiate a trade deal with the EU first, and that deal fell through because the EU was trying to negotiate a really terrible deal for Ukrainians, and Yanukovych, he refused to do that deal with the EU and then turned around and did a trade deal with Russia. But he was trying to negotiate with the EU and Russia when he did that trade deal. When he declined to take the unfavorable trade deal from the EU and do the trade deal with Russia, that's when Euromaidan started. That's when George Soros and the NGOs called everybody out to come and protest at Euromaidan, which Fareed Zakaria says that he fled because of protests. No, he fled because the Nazis were committing violence. He fled because people were being killed there in the square there in Maidan. And it was absolute chaos. That's why he fled. It was a violent coup d'etat.
In 2014, after national protests against him. Then came the allegations that Russia had interfered in the 2016 elections on Trump's behalf.
No evidence.
As a defense to those charges, some in Trump's orbit convinced him of a strange conspiracy theory.
All right, so I want you to notice this part. This strange conspiracy theory that Donald Trump was convinced of is what Fareed is talking about here, that Trump's advisors convinced him of this strange conspiracy theory. And he's going to talk about the phone call that Donald Trump had with Zelensky that led to his first impeachment.
Some in Trump's orbit convinced him of a strange conspiracy theory that it was actually Ukrainians pretending to be Russians.
That's a lie.
To blame.
That's a lie.
Trump seemed convinced by this explanation. In fact, so much so that in his infamous telephone call with President Zelensky in July 2019, he asked Zelensky for two favors. First, he wanted the server that would show these Ukrainian efforts to interfere in the U.S. election.
Okay, so the server that he's talking about here, he shows the transcript and what's actually said in the transcript, and he only circles the server. And if you're not if you don't know what the transcript actually says, and you just focus on when he circles the server, you have no idea what he's talking about if you don't know. You see right here, he talks about CrowdStrike. This is the sentence. This is Donald Trump talking to Zelensky. I would like you to find out what happened in this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. So what is Trump talking about? Well, the accusation that was made was that Russians and people working for the GRU hacked the DNC, hacked into John Podesta's emails in 2016, and then they retrieved this information from the DNC. Let's just talk about DNC. We don't have to talk about Podesta, but the DNC, and then they gave it to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks published this information from the DNC. The servers from the DNC that were supposedly hacked by the GRU were never turned over to the FBI for a forensic investigation. James Comey admitted this, that we never got the servers from the DNC where we could do our own forensic investigation. That the DNC hired a private firm called CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike did the forensic investigation and turned over the results of their forensic investigation of these servers to the FBI. And the FBI made all of their analysis based on the information that CrowdStrike had turned over for them. And then the servers, these DNC servers, just disappeared because they were handed over to CrowdStrike. Well, CrowdStrike, the company, this is one of the founders of the company. Hold on. Let's get CrowdStrike's founder, Dmitry. All right. So why does it keep doing that? All right. So anyway, CrowdStrike's founder is a Russian, and they did tons of work in Ukraine. This is not a conspiracy theory. Dmitry Perovich, so is the founder of CrowdStrike, is an American think tank founder, philanthropist. So he's a Russian. I don't know why it won't let me go to his page, but they did tons of work in Ukraine in 2014. Russian hacking investigation. CrowdStrike helped investigate Democratic National Committee cyber attacks and connection with Russian intelligence. So this was all done by CrowdStrike. On May 20th, or on the 20th of March, 2017, James Comey testified before Congress stating that CrowdStrike reviewed the evidence of the hacked and colluded with concluded with high certainty that it was the product of these Russian Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear, which they said were Russian outlets. So this is not out of the blue that Trump is bringing up CrowdStrike in this conversation with Zelensky. It's not a conspiracy or anything. I don't know why Fareed Zakaria is trying to make this out that it's a conspiracy. Where did the servers go? Why wasn't the FBI allowed to do a forensic examination of these servers, and only this private firm, CrowdStrike, that had connections in Ukraine were the only ones? So this isn't a conspiracy theory that Fareed Zakaria is trying to make Trump seem crazy because he's asking Zelensky, I want you to help me look for these servers.
In July 2019, he asked Zelensky for two favors. First, he wanted the server that would show these Ukrainian efforts to interfere in the U.S. elections and frame it on the Russians.
That's
and
a lie.
second, he wanted Zelensky to launch an investigation into Joe Biden and his son.
So that's a lie, too, that he asked Zelensky in that phone call. He wanted Zelensky to open up an investigation into Joe Biden and his son. No, there was already an investigation into Hunter Biden. And it's right here in the text. I mean, what is Fareed doesn't think that you have the ability to pause this and read what's right here in front of your face? There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, and Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General, that would be great. Why with the Attorney General? Because there was already an open investigation into Hunter Biden over the gun charge, over the tax charge, over FARA violations. He was already being investigated. So Donald Trump didn't tell Zelensky to open up an investigation. He says, I want you to work with the Attorney General on an investigation that we already have open, that we want you to help us look into with Hunter Biden. And Hunter Biden has been pardoned for all of this. His father gave him a pardon. How is this a conspiracy theory, Fareed? He received a pardon for these investigations that Donald Trump asked Zelensky to help the Attorney General look into. How's the Attorney General going to investigate FARA violations without working with the foreign country that the individual being investigated is supposed to have worked as a foreign agent in? If you have the ability to work with that country, if you're investigating someone illegally working as a foreign agent, then why wouldn't you ask that country to aid in the investigation?
First, he wanted the server that would show these Ukrainian efforts to interfere in the U.S. elections and frame it on the Russians. And second, he wanted Zelensky to launch an investigation into Joe Biden and his son.
So this is an absolute lie. Fareed Zakaria is just one member of the media doing this, and they're sowing discord. They're trying to be roadblocks to the peace agreement. They're not working towards peace. They're working to keep the war going. These are evil, wicked people. Evil, wicked people. This is Zelensky in Pennsylvania before the election, campaigning Zelensky at a munitions plant, signing munitions, smiling, there with Josh Shapiro, with Democrats. He was there campaigning with Democrats at this defense contractor, signing munitions, smiling. These are wicked people. They're not trying to get peace. They're wicked people. I'm almost done, but I want to point out Fareed Zakaria wrote this book in 2008 called Post-American World, where he's talking about that the United States is on the decline and that these Eastern countries like India and China, that they were on the rise, and that India and China are going to take over America because America's on the decline. India and China are on the rise. He wrote this book. And this is a interview that he does talking about his book. Post-American World is the title of this book. Post-American World. This means after America. And he talks about that why America is in the predicament that we are in at this time in 2008. Why America is on a decline and countries like China and India are on the rise. I want you to listen to what he says.
I think we're at a kind of a crossroads. I'm still an optimist, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Look, the challenges you talk about are very real. Yeah. And I think that I would add to them, I think I'm just saying perhaps in a slightly different way what you said. The challenge to the United States is very real because we are in a war in Iraq, we are in another war in Afghanistan, we have many domestic problems at home.
So listen to what he's saying, that the United States is facing a challenge right now in our decline in the post-American world, because at this time we were fighting war in Afghanistan, fighting a war in Iraq. We're in the middle of war, and we have domestic issues that we should be worried about, but we're focused on these wars.
The challenge to the United States is very real because we are in a war in Iraq, we are in another war in Afghanistan, we have many domestic problems at home. We have to really sort things out and ask ourselves, how are we going to thrive in this post-American world? How are we going to thrive while the rest of the world is doing well? We could get caught in a very familiar imperial trap like the British do, and I talk about this with the Boer War.
Listen to him.
They go around in South Africa and in the Middle East, and they're stabilizing all these peripheral.
Listen to him.
And meanwhile, the United States and Germany are rising. Yeah. And we have to remember that our biggest strategic challenge is how to deal with the rise of China and India and Brazil and Russia, not adjudicating the claims of Shiites and Sunnis in Baghdad, not figuring out what the particular arrangements of Somali warlords should be. We have to do some of that, and fine, but we've got to remember the prize is this big new world that's coming up. We've got to get into the 21st century.
Listen to what he's saying. He's saying that us focusing on these wars and policing the whole world, that he said that we're just like the British, and the British were a great empire where the sun never set, but they were out fighting all these wars, and they grew too large of an empire, and the United States and Germany were rising as the British Empire was falling. And in his book, Post-American World, he says that the United States is like the British at that time. And the United States is on its decline as China and India are on the rise. Has China been fighting wars for the past 30 years? No, they've been building their economy. I'll see you guys on Friday. I hope you guys have a great week, and see you on Friday.